I think he jumped ahead of guys like Dalton Kincaid. I think he jumped ahead of guys like Trey McBride. Hello and welcome to another edition of Fantasy Football Freaks. I'm Jason, he's Vaz, and indeed, the season has finally started. All of your drafting, all of your preparation, it's already in the past now. The question is, how can you set yourself up better for the future now that we know what we know from week one? Obviously, we're talking about a small sample size, but I think there is a certain amount of information that we can use to either panic or hold tight. So we're going to talk about some players today that you might need to panic on as we delve into this. Vaz, I think 1 week, sometimes it's not big enough of a sample size to really make a decision on some players, but you could say at the same time, maybe it is enough and you need to jump on it quick while you still can in terms of outsmarting other members of your league.
Yeah, so I think there's certain guys that you do need to panic on, but for the most part, I think it's important to stay level-headed and be totally cognizant of the fact that a lot of these guys are superstars and they will rebound next week. Like if you're sitting with a guy like Keenan Allen or Amari Cooper who had horrible games, but still got, close to 10 targets or possibly more than that, there's absolutely no reason to panic. It's entirely likely that, week two they'll put up a 20-point fantasy performance. So for the most part, you don't want to panic too much. Just wait. You'll see these guys produce eventually. But yeah, as you said, there are a few instances where, panic is fully necessary.
All right. Well, let's talk about the first guy that you want to talk about. There, you probably do need to panic a little.
Yeah, so the first couple guys I'd like to mention are both running backs, and they're Javonte Williams and Tyjae Spears. Two guys who you probably could have been hopeful for before week one because, the respective teams had been praising them. Like in Tyjae Spears' case, they were saying it was going to be a 50-50 split. And I think a lot of people believe that. But as it turned out, week one, we saw Tyjae Spears get 4 carries compared to Tony Pollard's 16. So it looks like a clear 1A, 1B situation there. And I don't think Tennessee's offense is good enough to support 2 running backs. So, yeah, I think for all intents and purposes, it's totally time to panic with Tyjae Spears.
All right.
And then,
yep.
And then also with Javonte Williams, similar situation. He only had 8 carries, 1 reception. Jaleel McLaughlin had 10 carries, which is very shocking to me that he out-carried Javonte Williams, but he also had 5 receptions as well. So I think it's possible that if they're winning, Javonte Williams could get more touches, but I think this is another guy that you need to panic on. I think if you're playing Dynasty, then wait for Javonte Williams to fall into the end zone one of these days and sell and grab what you can at that moment. If you search for a team that needs a running back and see if you can get back like a second round pick.
Yeah. In terms of that game, I'm a Seahawks fan, so I watched that game in its entirety against Denver. And I think, like you mentioned, I think the key there is they were losing for much of the second half. And I think because of that, that's why they were using McLaughlin more for his explosiveness and catching ability. Whereas I would imagine that had Denver been leading for more of the second half, then maybe Williams would have had more opportunity. But at the same time, this is Denver in Kansas City's division. How many games are they really going to be leading? I venture to say that I would have Denver as like a bottom 5 team, certainly a bottom 10 team. So how many wins are they really going to get, and how many opportunities is Javonte Williams really going to get in the second half? So I do have Javonte Williams in one of my leagues. I don't know how easy it's going to be to get rid of him, but yeah, certainly if I could get something significant for him at this point, I definitely would. The guy that I am concerned about is actually a guy that I've been low on all off season. And I think after week one, it confirmed a lot of what my expectations were in terms of how bad I think he's going to be this year and perhaps for the rest of his career. And that's Bryce Young. Let's look at his numbers. 13 for 30, so less than a 50% completion rate, 161 yards, no touchdowns to 2 interceptions. He was also sacked 4 times for 12 yards. And his rushing, he did have one rushing touchdown, 4 rushes for 12 yards altogether. And all of this was against New Orleans. Okay. This wasn't against Buffalo or against even Pittsburgh or Baltimore, like a top defensive team. This is the New Orleans Saints, who absolutely crushed them. So I think a lot of what I expected in terms of Bryce Young, not necessarily having top weapons around him either, but just his process ability and his accuracy. Some of the passes that I was watching during
Yeah.
the NFL Red Zone that they showed, it was pretty brutal how much he was missing his passes by. So his accuracy to me just seems completely out of touch of what it needs to be. So I don't have Young anywhere. If I were to, I'd be trying even harder to get rid of him. I really question if he'll have much of a career a year or two from now.
Yeah, I mean, there might be like an alternate universe somewhere where he was drafted to a far better team and he's a decent NFL quarterback. But the fact remains that he's on a team that has probably the worst offense in football and the worst defense in football. I don't know how it's possible, but that team is just god awful. Like to put up to allow the Saints to put up 50 points on you, that's just embarrassing. And as you said, like, yeah, Bryce Young just looks totally out of place in the NFL. You know, I think it's just too fast for him. He's in my mind, he's a bust. I think nobody needed a stronger week one performance than he did. He needed to come out and like show the NFL, show everyone that he's a legitimate NFL quarterback, but he took like 2 steps backwards.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's going to be impossible to sell him at this point. Definitely time to panic. His value rose a lot in the offseason, and I think after 1 week it's cratered. Like
Yeah.
I think everybody saw that. Yeah, he's just most likely a complete bust in the NFL.
The other thing to note is, remember, Carolina is the early favorites to finish last in the NFL. So there's a good chance that they end up with the first overall pick. And if they see a quarterback that they like in next year's draft, then that could once again essentially make Young a backup for the rest of his career, if whatever that turns out to be. So another thing to remember, which, they got absolutely blown out by the Saints in week one. So they do look like indeed an early favorite to finish last.
Now, I can't do it for you. The inches we need are everywhere around us. What are you gonna do?
Like! Subscribe! There's another guy that you are low on after week one is Travis Etienne. Why?
Yeah, so another guy that I don't want to panic on, but I'm very concerned because you probably used a very high draft pick on him if you're playing redraft. And then he had 12 carries, and you know what? Tank Bigsby had 12 carries as well. And Tank Bigsby looked excellent with 72 rushing yards. He had a couple breakaway runs. He looked like a completely different player than last season. And I think they want to use him more this year. I think that they made that clear. Etienne is a very good player, and Etienne is a good receiving option as well. So he'll be on the field in the red zone on third downs. He'll get a lot of important touches. So he's going to be very, very good for fantasy because he's playing on a high-powered offense. But that being said, he's not the workhorse running back that he was last year. So I think there is reason to panic because he's not going to give you the return on investment that you used for him, right? If you used like a second round or a third round pick in redraft, I don't think you're getting back that kind of results with Tank Bigsby seeing so many carries out of the backfield.
I did have Tank Bigsby as a sleeper, as his coaching staff were saying that he looked like a different player in training camp compared to the season before. So if you were listening to my praises of Tank Bigsby, perhaps you're not scrambling on the waiver wire to try to pick him up. Regardless of that, though, I agree to a certain degree. I think Bigsby is clearly taking up more of a role, certainly in the running game. But Etienne, of course, his luster, along with his rushing ability, is his catching ability, right? So I think he is obviously still going to remain a big role in that. And I guess the question becomes, how many games are Jacksonville going to be grinding out for wins as opposed to how many times are they going to be playing catch up later on? And I think, week by week, that'll give you an idea of how much of an impact ETN will make in the flow of the game. But yeah, I understand the cause for concern. At the same time, I think Bigsby is a guy to look for on the waiver wire if he is still available. The second guy that I want to talk about in terms that I'm down on, again, this is a guy that I was down on from the offseason, but I want to reiterate just how scary it can be. And this is Daniel Jones. He was 22 of 42. First off, it means that a lot of pass attempts. Okay, so they're down in the game. He made a lot of attempts, but again, he barely completed 50% with 22 completions for 186 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. I think he was sacked like 5 times in the game as well, and really not much of a rusher in this game. And again, this isn't against a top team. We're talking about Minnesota, who, is a middling team at best. So his performance was not something to write home about. They have said that they do plan to start Daniel Jones in week 2, so he hasn't lost his job or anything like that yet. But the important thing that I want to mention once again is at some point this season, if he doesn't improve his play to like Pro Bowl level, I expect that he will get replaced as a starter, probably somewhere towards the midpoint or second half of the season. And that's because of his contract. Remember last year with Russell Wilson, they wanted to bench Wilson because if he got injured towards the end of the season, then Denver would have been on line for the remainder of his contract for the following season. But by benching him, they're able to basically void the second half of the contract, which is what they did. The same thing happened with Jimmy Garoppolo the year before that when he was with Las Vegas. They benched him so that he couldn't get injured in a game. And I think this is going to be the 3rd year in a row that it happens to an overpriced quarterback, where in the second half of the season, Daniel Jones, New York's not going to be a good team, so they're not going to be worried about that. The most important thing is that they want to make sure that they don't have to pay the remainder of next year's contract in the case that he gets injured. So even if Jones, plays decently in the first half, I would say expect him to be replaced in the second half. Don't count on him to be a starter if you're making a playoff run or something like that. So get rid of him while you can.
Yeah, definitely time to panic on Daniel Jones. Listen, he's not an NFL caliber starting quarterback. I think that's clear. So kind of like similar situation with Javonte Williams. I think the moment he puts up a decent game, you try to get a second round pick for him if you can. Maybe you look for a team that is desperate at quarterback and try to get a second round pick for the guy, because he's not going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL for much longer. As you said, he's going to be replaced very, very soon. He's horrible. Like, let's just be serious here. He's a very, very bad quarterback. I'm not even sure he's a great backup quarterback. So, wait for a decent game and then move him for a second round pick if you can. Any second round pick, get him off your roster.
Yeah, I would take a late second for him for sure. Same with Caleb, to be honest with you. To be totally honest, both these guys, I'd be willing to take like 2/3 or something like that. Or
who's the other guy you mentioned? Sorry,
Daniel Jones as well as Caleb Williams. So in both cases, Caleb Williams, Daniel Jones, I would take 2/3 to
what?
get. I don't. Sorry, not Caleb Williams. Bryce Young. My mistake. Bryce Young. A little bit of a difference there. No, with Bryce Young and Daniel Jones, in both cases, I would take 2/3 for either of them, because I don't think that they're going to be worth anything in the very near future.
What do you say? What do you say? What do you say? You little brat? You have never thanked me. I'll see you tomorrow. Maybe.
Let's talk about the next guy is Jackson Smith-Njigba that you are now concerned about.
Yeah, from a dynasty perspective, I'm not, but from a redraft perspective, absolutely I am. I think there was a lot of hype surrounding JSN this offseason that he would like emerge, because he's a very talented player. We think he's a very talented player. But you're a Seahawks fan. You know this more than anybody. That team wants to run the football. Like, it's probably a top 5 rushing attack in the NFL, right? They want to pound the rock. And then Tyler Lockett's not going anywhere. He just had a pretty big game. I think he just put up 70 plus yards on 7 receptions. DK Metcalf is there as well. So JSN is clearly the third option in that passing game on a team that has like a below average NFL quarterback and an amazing rushing team with 2 excellent running backs. So yeah, I mean, from a redraft perspective, I'm incredibly concerned about JSN. I think if I have JSN on a redraft team, I'm willing to drop him if I want to add somebody from the waiver wire. That's how concerned I am.
Wow.
I'm definitely ready to panic. Yeah. I don't think I'm ever comfortable starting JSN unless there's an injury. Unless we get an injury to Lockett or Metcalf, I'm never going to be putting JSN in my starting lineup if I can find somebody else. Like, let me ask you a question. Who would you rather start? Brandon Cooks or JSN right now?
Brandon Cooks, easy.
Yeah. So like this is a guy that could be on your waiver wire, right? So
yeah,
I think there are other options for you out there than JSN. From a dynasty perspective, I think this was a very likely scenario. So I think you do not panic from a dynasty perspective. You might have to hold the entire year watching him put up poor production and just wait for Lockett to be gone at some point because you've used a high pick on him. So at some point you have to wait that his talent emerges, right? You have to hope that his talent emerges.
Yeah. Once again, Seahawks fan, saw the entire game and got a feel of the vibe of everything. And I think the first thing to note is that, once again, Seattle was leading for the entire second half. And like you said, they wanted to grind this out. They wanted to run. They were successful with the run. So there was no need to really have to pass in the second half. The start of the game, Seattle's offense really made a bunch of mistakes and penalties and an interception. There's a lot of mistakes that they made. They had a couple of safeties that they suffered. So they really never got into the groove of being able to show what I think they wanted to do with their offense. I will note that Jackson Smith-Njigba had 79% of the offensive snaps, whereas Tyler Lockett was just 54%. And DK Metcalf was the leader at 88. What I see with what they're trying to do on offense is I think DK is their physical freak, and they're going to make plays for him because he's kind of a different type of player. And then with Jackson Smith-Njigba and Lockett, I think it's more of like when they have different options, then it's whoever's open of them is going to get the ball, right? I don't think they're zeroing in on set plays for either of them as they do with Metcalf. But in the end, as mentioned, ideally, Seattle just wants to run the ball. So what does that all mean? As you mentioned, first off, I think JSN is more of a dynasty play. I think he's still going to be a great play. And if you can get him cheaper as he, does not succeed this year, then I would still do that because I think he'll still be an excellent play for the future. Having said that, I think it's clear that Tyler Lockett will most likely be better than JSN for redraft for this season. So I think he's up there in points, even though he didn't have the snap share. There were third down plays that clearly Geno Smith was trusting Lockett's hands because he has some of the best, as does JSN, by the way. But he could tell that the play was made for Lockett to get the ball on a quick, short third down play. So things like that, I think he does still own the trust. And this is despite the fact that Lockett was injured for much of the preseason and really didn't participate. So for redrafts, I think you're absolutely correct. I would panic on GSN, but for dynasties, I would hold tight and maybe even look to buy cheap for future, because I think in a year or two, GSN will be outstanding.
I think if you have a guy like J.K. Dobbins or something, a guy who just had a huge week 1 performance, looks like probably the top dog there in the Chargers offense. Maybe if you could take a guy like him who's often injured and move him for a JSN, maybe you have to add a little bit on top. I'm not sure, but if you could do something like that, I really like it.
Sounds good. The last guy that I want to talk about is Mark Andrews. I think most people probably know about this because it was the feature game on Thursday night. He had just 2 catches on 2 targets for 14 yards, and that's despite a 74% snap share. Isaiah Likely, 66% snap share, 9 catches on 12 targets for 111 yards. I think most people watch this game, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the key it's not necessarily Andrews. Okay. If you saw the game, you're concerned because of Likely, who looked amazing in the game. He looked absolutely explosive. Like he looked like what I imagined Kyle Pitts was going to be as a rookie coming out of college. He just looked explosive for a tight end. As if like when I was watching, it's like, man, he looks more like a wide receiver. And that was the vibe that I got. I would imagine that going forward, any coach on his team that saw that would say, we got to use this guy more. And I think that's what's going to happen. My understanding is that Andrews was injured. He was nursing an injury in the game, and perhaps they're just using him as a decoy for much of the game. But if I have Andrews, which I do in one league at least, I would be very concerned and perhaps willing to trade down on his services.
I'm not as willing to panic as you are. I think Andrews will rebound. I think he's too talented of a player. He's got a good rapport with Lamar. I think Isaiah Likely clearly does as well. I think he's a priority ad if he's on I would have spent my entire budget, 100% of my budget on Likely if he's on your waiver wire. But yeah, I think Andrews. Listen, he's a phenomenal player. He's going to rebound. So I would not panic in your shoes if you have him on your roster. Don't sell cheap. A lot of tight ends underperform week one. I think just hold tight, guys, Kelsey, Laporta, Andrews, these guys will come back strong.
Would you take Likely if he was offered to you for Andrews in a dynasty league 1-for-1?
No, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't? Right now,
no,
I would.
Not based off.
Right
based
now,
off
I
just
would.
one game, you would.
Yeah. Yes, based off that one game, I
Wow.
would because it was 12 targets to 2. They're on the same team. And just in terms of eye test, watching the eye test for me, if I could get Likely 1-for-1 for Mark Andrews in a dynasty format, I would do that. Redraft, I'm not sure. I don't know if I would for redraft because, like you said, I'm not saying that Andrews is going to be bad, right? I'm not saying that he's horrible and stuff. He's still probably going to be a top 2 or 3 weapon on that team. I just think Likely is right there with him, and he's so much younger for the future for dynasty. I am taking like for me. I think I would put Likely right now. I think he suddenly jumped into like maybe my top 5 tight ends for dynasty. I think he jumped ahead of guys like Dalton Kincaid. I think he jumped ahead of guys like Trey McBride. For me, for dynasty, looking forward to the future, I'm going to overreact and I will jump all over Likely on this as like a top 5 or 6 dynasty tight end. Call me crazy.
Yeah, it's quite bold. I need to see a little bit more, but I mean, yeah, the talent is clearly there. I think it's possible that he continues playing this well. I wouldn't say it's likely, but it's possible.
Nice. Yeah, the thing is, if you wait longer, then he's not going to be available at that price. And that's my concern, which is why I would jump on this now, because I think, 2-3 games that he pulls like this, then it's too late. Then you won't be able to get him at that price. But if I can get him at that price now, yeah, I would do like an Andrews for Likely as an example. Any other guys that you wanted to talk about for week 1 that maybe you're down on or that you're concerned, or maybe even on the other side, that guys that shocked you?
All right. I'd just like to get 2 guys quickly in here. In most dynasty rookie drafts, the top 2 picks, pretty much in every single dynasty rookie draft, the top 2 picks were Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. Both guys just had horrible performance week 1, right? So Caleb had, I think, 14 for 29, 93 yards passing. He did have like a drop in the end zone. Keenan Allen dropped a clear touchdown pass in the end zone, but I mean, he did not look good against like a very average Tennessee defense. So, I would say like from a redraft perspective, you could definitely panic on Caleb Williams. I think he's droppable, in single quarterback formats. But obviously for dynasty leagues, he's far too talented. I would not panic whatsoever. He will rebound. And same thing with Marvin Harrison Jr. I think it's very likely, even for redraft, I think even next week, we could just see a blow-up performance from Marvin Harrison Jr. So definitely do not panic with Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, I have Caleb Williams in a redraft league, and he's one of the guys that I'm willing to drop right now on a waiver ad that I'm trying to make. So I'm clearly okay with this is on a 1 QB redraft league, so I'm okay with dropping him. Marvin Harrison, let's remember with rookie wide receivers, sometimes in most cases, like 95% of the time, even if you're a first rounder, you don't necessarily have a good week in week 1. There's so many wide receivers that don't break out until like week 2 or 3 in their rookie season, if not even later than that. So the fact that Harrison had a poor or, underwhelming week 1, I am not concerned about at all.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
let's not forget, like they got out to a huge lead against Buffalo, right?
Yeah.
And they wanted to run the ball and they wanted to burn that clock. So they were not focused on, they're not playing from behind. It was a game script that did not favor Marvin Harrison Jr. getting the ball. So let's not forget that. Let's give him a little bit more room there, a little bit more flack.
Yeah, fully agree with you. That is our roundup of week 1 in the NFL. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, and we'll see you next time on another edition of Fantasy Football Freaks.